第1の報告でございますが、オークランド工科大学、ギャンブリング・アディクション・リサーチセンター、アソシエイトディレクターのマリア・ベルジンガー先生によります、ニュージーランドにおけるリスポンシブルゲーミングでございます。マリア先生、お願いいたします。
こんにちは。私の名前は Dr. Maria Emiko Bellringer. I'm the Associate Director of the Gambling and Addictions Research Centre at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the New Zealand public health approach to responsible gambling, to minimising gambling harms. Before I start, I'd just like to introduce myself. My mother is Japanese. She was born in Fukuoka, near Kurame City in Kyushu Island. My father is English. He grew up near Windsor Castle, where Queen Elizabeth lives. My father met my mother, and they got married in Japan. And then my mother migrated to England to live with my father. So I was born in England and I grew up English, so I apologize that I cannot speak any Japanese. In 2001, I migrated to New Zealand. I've lived in New Zealand ever since, so New Zealand is my home now. Now, as you can see, sorry, wrong slide, back. As you can see, New Zealand and Japan are very similar countries. They're both long and narrow countries with several islands, and they're both volcanic countries. So geographically, they're very similar, but in terms of gambling availability, they're a little bit different. So in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about several things. I'm going to start very briefly with a little bit on problem gambling and harms from gambling. Then I'll explain the differences in gambling availability between New Zealand and Japan. And then I'll talk about the public health approach to responsible gambling in New Zealand. I'll talk about the legislation, host responsibility, minimising harm, and then I will summarise with some implications for you here in Japan. So in terms of gambling prevalence, in New Zealand in 2018, about 2/3 of the adult population had gambled on at least one activity in the past year. Using a problem gambling screen, a measure of problematic gambling, the Problem Gambling Severity Index, or the PGSI, 1.9% of the adult population were categorised as moderate risk or problem gamblers. So they were experiencing a reasonable level of negative consequences and harms from their gambling. And a further 3.6% were classified as low-risk gamblers. So these people were still experiencing some negative harms from their gambling, but a much lower level. So about 4.5% of the New Zealand adult population are currently experiencing negative consequences from their gambling or gambling harms. In 2012, we used a different gambling screen measure, the South Oaks gambling screen, which we used in a lifetime format. So this measures whether people have ever had problems with their gambling. And using the South Oaks gambling screen, 2.4% were classified as lifetime problem gamblers, and a further 2.1% as probable pathological gamblers. So again, about 4.5% were experiencing some level of gambling harms. In Japan, in 2017, a prevalence survey measured problematic gambling using the South Oaks gambling screen, so the same screen that we used in 2012. But this was used in two ways. As a current measure, so in the past 12 months, In the past 12 months, 0.8% were current pathological gamblers. Using the lifetime format, 3.6% lifetime problem gamblers, or pathological gamblers. So slightly higher than in New Zealand, comparing with the 2.1% in New Zealand. Now, talking about harms from gambling, there are many, many harms from gambling, and we all immediately think about financial harms because gambling involves money. And we might think about crimes as well, so these financial harms and crime, because people steal to get money to gamble. But there are many other different types of harms as well that are not always immediately thought about. There are harms to relationships, to family members, to friends, to work colleagues. There are mental health issues associated with problem gambling, anxiety and depression, and suicide. Physical health problems associated with gambling because people spend time gambling, poor nutrition, they're not moving, they're not eating properly. Cultural harms from gambling. This is very important in New Zealand, which is a very multicultural society. We have more than 40 different people from different ethnicities and cultures living in the country. And also harms to education or work. If people are gambling, they're not studying or they're not working. So gambling harms are much wider than financial harms. There are a lot of harms that need to be considered. And for every one problem gambler, between 5 and 10 other people are negatively affected. And this was first identified by the Australian Productivity Commission way back in 1999. So one person with problems actually affects a lot of people. So in terms of gambling availability, in New Zealand we have a lot of different forms of gambling readily available. We have 6 casinos around the country. The casinos have table games and electronic gaming machines. Our biggest casino in Auckland is perhaps a little bit more like your integrated resorts will be, because it's not just a casino, it's an entertainment complex. So associated with the casino, we have a theatre, 2 hotels, a convention centre, many restaurants and bars. And we also have the Sky Tower, which is a big tourist destination, not as high as your Tokyo Tower that I went to yesterday. We also have National Lottery, the Lotto, and instant scratch cards. We have electronic gaming machines in pubs and clubs and hotels, so they are all over the country, very, very readily accessible. We have horse and dog race betting, sports betting, Keno, bingo, card gambling such as poker. The little charities can also have lotteries and raffles to raise money for their organisations. And we have internet gambling. The lotteries and the racing board are allowed to offer internet gambling within New Zealand. They are the only gambling organisations within New Zealand allowed to offer internet gambling. But of course, people can access online casinos just through their cell phones or tablets, any mobile devices. They can gamble on the offshore sites. In Japan, you have horse race betting, bicycle, powerboat, motorcycle race betting, lotteries, pachinko, which some of you may think is not gambling, but we think it is. And soon you'll have your integrated resorts with casinos. So traditionally, a responsible gambling approach was an individual approach. It revolved around gamblers who had problems. So it targeted these individual gamblers. The individual responsible gambling approach would provide treatment for problem gamblers, maybe information on how gambling activities work, or information for problem gamblers, how to seek help if they have a problem. The issue with an individual approach is it does not take into account that broad spectrum of harms that are experienced not only by gamblers, not only by problem gamblers, but those classified as moderate risk, low risk gamblers on that scale to developing problems, but also the people around them. The individual approach does not take these people into account. And also, the individual approach to responsible gambling leads to gamblers feeling a lot of shame and stigma, because the individual approach says, you have the problem. I have the problem, therefore I'm ashamed of it. I want to save face. I don't want to tell my family or my friends. I certainly don't want to seek help and let other people know I have the problem. And so it can increase mental health problems and suicide. So in New Zealand, we have a public health approach to responsible gambling. And this is a prevention approach. It does not focus on the problem gambler, but it aims to minimize and prevent harms from gambling within the whole country. The public health approach recognizes that people experience varying levels of harm. So even before they get to that problem gambler stage, that people are starting to experience harm. And it also recognizes that the harm affects families and communities, not just an individual. So we have legislation for our public health approach in New Zealand, the Gambling Act from 2003. The aims of the Gambling Act, I've put up on the slide. The main aim, to control the growth of gambling. So we do this, for example, by casino licensing. We have 6 casinos in New Zealand. We're not allowed to have any more casinos. The Gambling Act prevents and minimises the harm caused by gambling, including problem gambling, by various measures. So, for example, we have age restrictions. You have to be aged 20 years to enter the casino, 18 years to play on the non-casino electronic gaming machines, to buy scratch cards, to place wagers on sports betting or horse and dog race betting. We have restrictions on where the ATM machines can be placed. They're not allowed to be within a gambling venue. They can be outside, but not within. We have advertising standards. Gambling is not allowed to be advertised to young people, not allowed to be advertised so that you think you might increase your social status by gambling. Electronic gaming machines are not allowed to be advertised on television. And we have in-game characteristics that are designed to minimize harm. So our electronic gaming machines have pop-up messages and player information displays. Now, these pop-up messages appear on the screen randomly within every 30 minutes of playing. And when the message comes, the screen freezes for 15 seconds. So the gambler cannot play for 15 seconds. And this message explains how much time and money that the gambler has spent in that session. After 15 seconds, the gambler can then choose to finish the gambling session or carry on gambling. If they gamble for another 30 minutes, they'll get another pop-up message. The Gambling Act authorises some gambling and prohibits the rest of gambling. So, like I said, in terms of internet gambling, it authorises New Zealand Lotteries and the Racing Board to offer internet gambling. Nobody else is allowed to offer internet gambling at the moment to New Zealanders from within New Zealand. The Gambling Act insists on host responsibility provided by the different gambling sectors. So every single gambling sector has its own host responsibility measures. This is the casino and even lotteries. It ensures the integrity and fairness of games. So, for example, electronic gaming machines are not allowed to be misleading. We're not allowed to have buttons that you think you have control over the game when you do not. It also limits opportunities for crime or dishonesty associated with gambling, so loan sharks, money laundering. Of course, criminals like to launder money, especially through casinos. Something different, I think, about our public health approach and the Gambling Act is that it ensures that money from gambling benefits communities, so money has to go to charitable purposes. So 100% of the profits from Lotto have to go to charity. 40% of the profits from the non-casino electronic gaming machines goes to charity. And a proportion of the casino profits also have to go to charity. And finally, the Gambling Act facilitates community involvement in decisions about the provision of gambling. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but basically everything, any major decisions, even changes to the regulations and the law, go for public consultation, and anyone is allowed to express their opinion on this. In reality, it's mainly the academics and treatment providers who do this. The Gambling Act has a very broad definition of harm. It defines harm as harm or distress of any kind arising from or caused or exacerbated by a person's gambling. And it includes personal, social, and economic harm caused by the person, that's the gambler, by the person's spouse or family or wider community, in the workplace, and by society at large. So it thinks about harm to everybody, just not to the gambler, not just to the gambler, but to everybody. And that's what it means by a public health approach. Now, the gambling legislation is the responsibility of three government departments. The Department of Internal Affairs is responsible for all gambling regulation. So they will audit all the different gambling providers for compliance with the law. They investigate all the different gambling providers to make sure that they're following the law, and also to check that their host responsibility programs are in place and being followed. There are dedicated casino inspectors who regularly visit each of the casinos. In 2014 and 2016, the Department of Internal Affairs conducted what they called a mystery shopper exercise. What this means is that they hired actors to pretend to be gamblers who had problems or were moderate risk gamblers, so on that slope to having problems. They hired these actors to go into gambling venues and gamble and pretend to have problems. And the purpose of this was to see if the venue's host responsibility programs were in operation, because under the host responsibility programs, the venues are not allowed to have gamblers or potential problem gamblers or potential problem gamblers in their venues, and so they have to identify these people and help them. So the Department of Internal Affairs conducted these mystery shopper exercises, and they found that some venues had very poor host responsibility. And I will talk a little bit later about what they are doing about that to increase the host responsibility for these venues. The Department of Internal Affairs also invites public submissions on changes to gambling regulations. So, for example, a recent one has been on online gambling in New Zealand. The Gambling Act is out of date. In 2003, there was not much online gambling. Of course, nowadays, everybody can easily gamble online through their cell phones. So the Gambling Act needs an amendment. The Department of Internal Affairs put out this public discussion document on online gambling in New Zealand, and we were all invited to make submissions on this to say what we think about what they are proposing in terms of the new regulations. The second government department involved in the gambling regulations is the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health is responsible for preventing and minimising gambling harm, and they do this in many ways. They fund all the treatment services within New Zealand. So these are treatment services for gamblers and family members. In fact, anybody who is being harmed either by their own gambling or by someone else's gambling. There is a national gambling helpline which operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so it's always open. People can contact the helpline by telephone, by text message, or by email, and they can receive treatment through those methods. There are 2 national counselling services. These are face-to-face services with clinics throughout the country. And they also fund ethnic-specific services for Maori, who are New Zealand's Indigenous people, Pacific people, and Asian services as well. And I'll mention about one of our Asian services in a moment because they also provide treatment for Japanese people in New Zealand. So all these services are free for gamblers and family members because the Ministry of Health pays for the treatment. The Ministry of Health also funds public health activities. So this is when public health workers go to public events and they will raise awareness around gambling, but they may also offer brief treatment or brief intervention for anybody who thinks that they need help. The Ministry of Health funds independent scientific research on gambling, so most of the research that I do in my research centre is funded by the Ministry of Health. They fund evaluation of the treatment and public health services and also effectiveness studies, randomised controlled trials of different treatment interventions. They fund social marketing and raising awareness, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. They fund workforce development and training so that the counsellors and public health workers are the best they can be. They fund a consumer network. Now, consumers are people with lived experience of gambling harms, so people who used to have gambling problems or were related or friends of somebody who had gambling problems who they have experienced harms themselves. This consumer network advises the government, treatment providers, researchers, anyone who needs advice from the perspective of someone who has experienced the harms. And the Ministry of Health also funds conference support for an international gambling conference that is held in Auckland in New Zealand every 2 years. The next conference is next June in Auckland, and there are some brochures for this conference outside on the table for anyone who's interested in coming. Otherwise, the conference website is down here. I just mention this because some of you may be interested to come to Auckland next year. We will have all the members of our government departments, the Department of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Health, the Gambling Commission, treatment providers, the Asian treatment services there. If you're interested to learn more about the New Zealand public health approach or treatment or anything else that we do, this would be the conference to come to. And I mentioned the Asian treatment services that also provides Japanese services. So this is just a snapshot from their website, the Japanese page. I don't know how clear it is on the screen, but just so that you can see that we do provide treatment for everybody in New Zealand. So the third government department involved in the gambling legislation is the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission all comprise lawyers, so they deal with the legal aspects of gambling. So they deal with casino licensing and renewal of casino licenses. All our casinos originally had a 25-year license to operate. The first casino's license expired this year. So about 18 months ago, they applied for renewal of their license. It was a long process because the casino had to provide an impact report. They had to identify the benefits and the harms that would be caused to their community and their city by the casino. The Gambling Commission then sent this impact report to an independent academic for peer review. They sent it to Australia. And then they invited public submissions. So then everybody in New Zealand could comment. We could look at the impact report provided by the casino. We could read the independent peer review. The Gambling Commission considered all the submissions, all the information that they had, and they decided to renew this casino's license for another 15 years, and they added an extra condition of that 2.5% of the profits had to go to charity. The Gambling Commission also listens to licensing applications where there are changes to casino licensing applications. So, for example, another one of our casinos currently wants to replace 3 blackjack tables with 60 electronic gaming machines. Now, the law says we cannot increase gambling opportunities in New Zealand, so there is a legal process at the moment to try and identify whether 3 blackjack tables is equivalent to 60 electronic gaming machines, and that process is still ongoing. Again, we were all invited to make submissions and comment on that. The Gambling Commission also deals with licensing and enforcement decision appeals. So if, for example, the Department of Internal Affairs wants to close down a gambling venue because they are not meeting the government's regulations, not meeting host responsibility, if that venue appeals and says, no, please don't close us down, then they go to the Gambling Commission and there's a legal process to decide whether the venue is closed or stays open. And the Gambling Commission also advises the Minister of Health on the problem gambling levy. Now, the problem gambling levy is a mandatory levy on all 4 of our gambling sectors to recover the cost of developing, managing, and delivering the strategy to reduce gambling harm. The levy rates are set every 3 years, and the gambling sectors which contribute to the levy are the casinos, the non-casino gaming machine operators, the New Zealand Racing Board, and the New Zealand Lotteries Commission. The levy is calculated on a formula that considers 3 different aspects. It considers the amount of money lost by gamblers to that particular sector, so that particular gambling provider, so that's the player expenditure. It considers the harm caused by that type of gambling. It uses a proxy for harm related to the people who seek treatment, which gambling product they say is causing them harm. And it also takes into account the expected or the forecast gambler expenditure over the next 3 years. So what this means is that each of the 4 different gambling sectors pays a different amount into the gambling levy. Non-casino electronic gaming machines pays the most at 0.78%. Then it's the casino sector, 0.56%, and lotteries pay the least at 0.43%. Now, this may sound like a very small amount of money that they pay, but it amounts to $60 million New Zealand dollars for the next 3 years, which I calculated is equivalent to about 4.1 billion Japanese yen. And to put this into context, we have less than 5 million people in New Zealand, so that 4.1 billion yen is for less than 5 million people in New Zealand. You have about 126 million people in Japan, so multiply up that $4.1 billion, that's quite a billion yen, that's quite a lot of money that goes into preventing and minimizing gambling harm. The Ministry of Health administers these levy funds for all of the things that I told you that they do. Now, each of our gambling sectors has to have a host responsibility program, all of them, lotteries, racing board, non-casino electronic gaming machine operators and casinos. I do not have time to talk about all the different types of host responsibility, so I will just focus on the casinos today because that's probably more relevant to you with your integrated resorts and with their casinos. So the casinos have to do many things. Obviously, they have to train their staff in problem gambling awareness, how to identify problem gamblers within the venue. They have to prohibit access to people who are less than 20 years old. They have to provide information and support for gamblers. So this information is not just information on where treatment can be received, but it's also information on all the different types of gambling games offered by the casino. They have to explain how people play the games, and also the odds of winning. They have to provide an exclusion process where people can ban themselves from the casino, and I'll talk about that in a moment. They have to detect criminal behaviours, loan sharks and money laundering. They have to identify not only problem gamblers but also potential problem gamblers. By law, they're not allowed to have these people within the casino. And they can do this with loyalty data analytics from VIP cards. Most regular gamblers at the casino have a card, and this card collects data on the amount of money and time they spend gambling. So the casino has the information to be able to identify if people may be starting to gamble in a problem way. Casinos have a host responsibility team available 24 hours every day of the year. So all the time, someone from the host responsibility team is available to help gamblers, to exclude from the casino, to provide information, support, help their staff members, identify people, all sorts of things. Obviously, they provide alcohol, so they have to have responsible alcohol provision, and they also have to have responsible gambling provision. So, for example, if somebody excludes from the casino, they must deactivate the loyalty card. They must not continue to send enticements and inducements for the person to return to the casino. They have to provide a safe environment. Traditionally, casinos have been dark places, no natural light, no clocks to keep people gambling. In New Zealand, all casinos have to have windows, let the natural light in. They have to have clocks so people can see the time, people can see the passage of time, so that they know how long that they have been gambling. And the casinos also have liaison meetings with treatment providers. So they have regular meetings with treatment providers to work better together with treatment providers and provide the best service for gamblers who may need help to get the relevant help. Now, we have two types of exclusion order in New Zealand. People can self-exclude, so this is where the gambler asks to be excluded or banned from a venue. The gambler can either go to the venue, fill out the form, have their photograph taken, and be excluded from the venue. But this is a shameful thing to do, to go to the venue, gambling venue, and say, I have a problem. So gamblers can go to treatment services to exclude from a venue. And the counsellor at the treatment service will fill in the form, take the photograph, and send the information to the venue. We also have venue exclusion, where the venue can say to the person, you are banned, if the person refuses to self-exclude. And any gambling venue must take any third-party requests for exclusion very seriously. So this is where a family member might go to the casino or other gambling venue and say, please exclude my husband or wife, they are gambling too much. Then the venue has to investigate to see whether that person should be excluded. Now, there are problems with self-exclusion or banning from one venue. People just go and gamble at a different venue. So we also offer multi-venue exclusion, where gamblers can ban themselves from not just one venue, but from maybe all the venues in their city or from all the casinos. Again, we do not expect gamblers to go to every single venue to exclude. That's too much work, too embarrassing. They can go to one venue and nominate all the different venues that they wish to be excluded from, or they can go to their treatment service, to the counsellor, and say, I want to be excluded from all of these venues, and then the information is sent out to all the venues. Our exclusions are issued for a maximum of 2 years. They can be shorter, but maximum is 2 years. Once that it has been issued, it then cannot be shortened, so it goes for the length of time that it has been issued for. Now, we do have problems with exclusion orders. It's not perfect in New Zealand. We have people who deliberately breach their exclusion orders, so they deliberately go back to the venue to gamble, and often they will disguise themselves, put on a hat, sunglasses, fake beard. We've had this happen, to go back and gamble. People will gamble at alternative venues. This happens less now that we have multi-venue exclusion. 2 years is a long time. People sometimes forget that they're excluded and they will gamble at the venue. We do not in New Zealand have a centralised system, we do not have an electronic system, and we do not have any nationwide coordination. These are all things that we are currently working on because these are problems with our exclusion system. Possible solutions are facial recognition technology, having a centralised electronic database, and modern technology with mobile phone applications. And these are all things we're looking into at the moment. So social marketing I mentioned. I'm just going to focus a little bit on this because it could be useful for you in terms of your harm minimisation approaches. So the Ministry of Health funds the Health Promotion Agency for all the social marketing, which includes things like television advertisements, raising awareness about problematic gambling, and radio advertisements, but it also includes many other things. So the Health Promotion Agency, on their website, they promote risk awareness and positive action messages to encourage behaviour change, various things on the website. They develop and promote self-help digital tools because research has shown that most gamblers who have problems want to help themselves first before going to a professional service. Information on how to help someone else, or your loved one who may have a problem with gambling. It also lists all the different treatment services and explains what the support is. And perhaps more importantly for you is that they develop tools to help venues with host responsibility. And I've just put the website there if you're interested in having a look further. So in terms of the tools to help venues with host responsibility, at the moment they're focusing on the non-casino gaming machine venues because in the Department of Internal Affairs mystery shopper exercise, there were many non-casino electronic gaming machines who failed in terms of their host responsibility. So the Department of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Health are working together with the Health Promotion Agency to develop tools and a training program to increase the host responsibility at these venues. And again, I've put the website details there that you can look at. The host pack has lots of information in terms of host responsibility. So what are the implications for Japan? Well, you will have integrated resorts with casinos, your first casinos in the country. Obviously, it will be very important to protect the Japanese people from developing gambling problems. And I know that there are various discussions around how to protect people, so various entry restrictions on how many times people can enter within a month, for example, and entry fees. But people circumvent entry restrictions. If they really want to go and gamble more than those restrictions, people find a way. Human beings are very resourceful. And in fact, Philander in 2017 identified that entry fees themselves are not effective as a responsible gambling tool. Your casinos will also have to protect their workers from developing gambling problems. Research has shown that people who work within casinos have a much higher risk of developing problems from gambling than other adults. And of course, casinos are magnets for crime syndicates to launder their money, so there will have to be processes in place to try and stop money laundering. So it would be very important to have strong regulations and harm minimisation processes in place at the integrated resorts. And these will need to be controlled and regulated at the government level to be effective. It will be important to have very strict casino host responsibility. Something you might want to consider is mandatory pre-commitment. I don't know of any casinos at the moment who have mandatory pre-commitment. A lot have voluntary pre-commitment. Voluntary doesn't work, but mandatory pre-commitment where people will say how much time and money they intend to spend gambling in that session, and once they reach that maximum, they cannot gamble more in that session. And just to be aware that people with gambling problems gamble on multiple activities. So they may come to the casino having already gambled on other activities and adding casino gambling to the other activities increases the risk for problem gambling, or maybe they do not have problems at the casino, but then they go and gamble on horse race betting, on other activities and develop problems. And so this is one of the reasons why a public health approach is very important, because it considers that broad spectrum of harms and the fact that people may be harmed in different ways from different combinations of gambling. And so I know I have finished in my time now. So, arigatou gozaimasu.